Hey, this is John from StubGroup, and I'm very excited to be joined today by Simon Poulton from Ignite Visibility and the Measure Up podcast. We're going to be talking about Google Chrome cookies and privacy, all sorts of fun stuff. Very excited to get Simon's take on some of the things that are changing in 2024. And Simon, what should our viewers and listeners know about you?
Well, about myself. My name is Simon Poulton. Of course, as you noted, I am the Chief Data Officer at Ignite Visibility. Prior to joining Ignite, I was the VP of Digital Intelligence at Wpromote. So I've spent, near a decade at this point thinking about all aspects of measurement. I wasn't always just in the measurement space, though. I was someone who came over more from a digital marketing strategist viewpoint. So I've always really tried to view the world of measurement through that lens, right? And just really, if I had one mission in life, it is really to democratize access and understanding to measurement concepts to all digital marketers. Oh, and I'm from New Zealand. That's the accent. But I live here in LA. So.
New Zealand is on my short list to visit. I've made it to Australia,
Okay.
but New Zealand is probably top five, I guess, to be
Yeah.
there. But I
Well,
want
New
to
Zealand-
follow the trail of the Hobbit.
Yeah, well, no. As is everyone, New Zealand is a lovely place, picturesque, scenic. I love going back there, but I also fell in love with California, and it's where I met my wife. It's where I went to college, and really, built my life, had my kids, all those good things. So I don't think I'll be going back anytime soon, but it's a lovely place to visit.
Let's talk cookies. I'm going to
Sure.
try and get through this without too many of the requisite, chocolate chip macadamia jokes
Indeed.
that everyone's got to throw in. But for those who are watching who don't really understand why we're talking about cookies and what it means, let's just start from the basics. Can you just kind of explain what are cookies, what are third-party cookies, and
Yeah.
how do advertisers traditionally use them for advertising?
For sure. So I think you noted third party, and I think that's an incredibly important distinction because there are two, independent cookie scopes, one being the first party cookie and one being the third party cookie. In order to really explain this, I think the best way to go about it is to provide an analogy. So, for example, if you walk into a hardware store, there are going to be security cameras inside that store, and those cameras will film you as you walk about, and so they'll see what you're purchasing. But then when you leave that store, the cameras do not follow you outside of it, right? We'd call those first-party security cameras in this case. Now, hypothetically, if you had like a Truman Show situation where you had a camera that was just following you at all times, that followed you into the store, or perhaps someone in the store is, from the Truman Show, they capture you in the store and they go, I'm going to follow this guy home. And then they'll follow you down the road to your next store, to somewhere else. But they'll still be sending all that information back to the original store. That is a third-party cookie. So the core difference between these two is a first-party cookie is an identifier on an individual that is within one website, that stays with you on that website, but then does not follow you around the rest of the web. And a third-party cookie is one that will be placed by a website, but then will persist with you within your browser when you do go to other websites. I think what's really interesting, though, and maybe where folks do get a little hung up and maybe a little confused, is when we talk about Google and Facebook, for example, and we talk about first and third-party cookies for them. When Google and Facebook are placing a first-party cookie on someone, they essentially have a hub and spoke relationship with those cookies. So, go to website A, and they'll have the first-party Facebook cookie that they'll load on me. That signal is then sent back to Facebook, right? So there's this acknowledgement that, hey, you saw an ad on Facebook, you went to that website, maybe you didn't click, but you just went through, and we have that information. What they're then able to do, though, is because they have these robust identity graphs, is when I go to another website, a third-party cookie isn't following me along that journey, but when I go to another website, they have their tracking pixel on there as well, and then that information is also sent back to home base. So those are two first-party cookies, but because it's a hub and spoke sort of triangulation model, it functions in a way like a third-party cookie, right? They allow for that identity to be resolved, and they know that you've gone to both these websites. And I think that is where maybe that's what trips a lot of folks up, is this idea of like, well, how is that any different? I'm like, yeah, it's not really, right? So I actually have great disdain for this term, the cookie apocalypse. One, because I think it buckets this idea that all cookies are the same together. But two, because it doesn't actually account for the broader shifts that we're seeing in the ecosystem. I think something that we'll definitely want to tap into a little bit later is this idea of intelligent tracking prevention, app tracking transparency, right? These fundamental shifts that we've seen in the way that deterministic identity is persisted, that in addition to cookies, are limiting our ability as marketers to have that deterministic ID resolve.
And so just kind of cementing the idea for people who are watching. So let's say I'm an advertiser and I got Google's tracking code pixel for my Google Ads account. I put that on my website so I know when someone fills out a form, I can track that back to my Google Ads account.
Sure.
That's a first-party cookie? Is that right? That's considered first-party because it's my website and my code? Or is that third-party?
This is where it also gets a little bit complicated, is there have been third-party cookies placed in that context and first-party cookies placed. But because of the moves, like Google, Facebook, all these other major platforms, they are not going into this blind, right? Like they've known for quite some time third-party cookies are going to be deprecated. In fact, Safari actually deprecated third-party cookies back in 2020. So we're actually living in this post-third-party cookie world now, going on almost 4 years. That, I think, is is one of the maybe greatest misunderstandings about what's going on right now. It's like, oh, we're going to lose all this. I'm like, we're already living in it. And if you think about the sort of global browser share, well, Chrome's around 50%, Safari's around 30%. Like everyone else has already made this move. Chrome is just the sort of the lone laggard here. And for what it's worth, they also have the biggest microscope on them from all these regulatory bodies and everything like that. So there's a lot of complex elements in play here. But in that particular scenario, yes, that you would use a first-party cookie there that is then sending that information to Google, but it is not persisting with you when you leave that website.
Got it. So when Google Chrome says, hey, or when Google says that with Google Chrome Q3 of 2024, we are deprecating all cookies, or deprecating all third-party cookies.
Yeah.
What exactly does that mean? What changes?
So it's going to be a phased approach, right? We're already in, I think they're calling it the 1% category, where about 1% of third-party cookies were eliminated. What that means, though, is not 1% globally, right? It means 1% of browsers. And so you can actually go in and see your own cookie settings within your browser. It's a very easy Chrome settings view. So you can just go in there and you can see, and it will basically say, yes, and now we're using these topics to target you. So I guess in a broader capacity, this is the stated timeline that Google has provided for them to deprecate third-party cookies. But they've punted on this before, and it stands to reason that they may do it again. So I guess I won't believe it until I see it. I might believe it maybe when we're like at 70%. I'll be like, okay, there's probably no going back from this. But like I said before, like the reality is we're already living in this post-third-party cookie world. So not much is really going to change for the bulk of advertising that we do these days. And I think one of the issues one of the challenges I hear a lot of folks talk about is, I'm really concerned about third-party cookies, and I'll say, well, what platforms are you running on? They say, I'm running Google Ads, doing a lot of search, and Facebook. And I'll say, then you're fine. This is really something that is going to impact the programmatic ecosystem, not the search and the walled garden social, and really not walled gardens in general at all. And I like to think of, there's the traditional walled garden of, it's Facebook, you log in, you're there on Facebook, walled garden, they've got your identity signals tied to your login. But Google's also a walled garden in that they have Google Maps, YouTube, Gmail, Google Search. All of that is contained within your login there. So that is also a walled garden unto itself. So there's still going to be some degree of this deterministic identity that will be able to be utilized for targeting. But obviously, as we think about the broader spectrum of things here, the core group that this will impact are going to be those programmatic folks, and really just running programmatic display across the open web.
Mm-hmm. And for anybody who's watching or listening who isn't really familiar with that term programmatic, could you give some examples of like where do programmatic ads display on the web?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think you even used the term right there, display, right? Programmatic at its core is just the idea of advertising in multiple formats across the open web. So I think, frankly, I saw something the other day actually that was it was like 70% of marketers don't know what programmatic is. And I'm like, that's because the term is just so ambiguous and nebulous. And I'll be very honest, when I first heard it, I was like, I don't know what that is. I just thought it was just like automated buying, right? And to some degree, there are degrees of automation, of course, but that's true in every medium. It's really this core idea that you can manage multiple different assets across the open web instead of just buying within like the Facebook feed or anything. You've got 5,000 different types of placements out there. We've all seen, you go to websites and they have certain types of display, but then sometimes they've got these really engaging, really like they open up and they have like little things and they point back to self-referential elements. Those really that's programmatic at its core, but it also does extend out to things like CTV and OTT buying. So with that said, they use different signals as well for targeting, like IP addresses that will mean that they're somewhat immune from this, right? Like your TV is not storing cookies on you, but there's still going to be that targeted those targeted videos. But again, that's IP tied, or that's tied to the account that you're using to be logged in there. Like if you're using YouTube TV, for example.
Sometimes a little bit frustratingly targeted. I was last night watching on our Amazon Fire TV with my wife, watching a show, and I am so hungry for whatever reason, and I'm seeing Domino's Pizza and Olive Garden. Like, come on, guys, really?
They know what they're doing. I thought you were going to say, you always see the horror stories about, like, I was going to propose, and they started advertising wedding rings on TV, and you're like, oh yeah. Those are like, I guess those are all the stories you hear about, like the craziest things that could possibly happen, like the Target predicting a girl was pregnant. That whole story never happened. I've looked into this for years. It came from a story about what could, in theory, happen with the way that you can use data. But the reality is there was no actual evidence to support it other than an anecdote somebody shared at one time. So I put that out, and you can go and look this up. Like a lot of folks have done more investigative reviews than I had. It is to say, there is a sense out there, broadly, globally, that digital advertising and the power that we have and the data that we have is way more powerful than what we actually do have. And so I also think that that is an element of this, in that means that the impact isn't actually as broad. And actually, there have been a number of studies that actually go both ways on this. Some studies say, hey, deterministic advertising and topic or contextual-based advertising, there's really no difference. And then some of the studies say, no, there's a massive difference, and there's going to be a CPM change and all these pieces of this puzzle. And the reality is it will probably have positive and negative effects, but it'll be very industry specific. It's like anytime you see a study on does remarketing work, and the answer is, it's binary, it's a yes or no. Well, the reality is that type of remarketing worked, or that type of remarketing didn't work. And if you just batch everyone who's ever visited your website, good chance remarketing doesn't work. But if you have a mindful way that you're going about it, maybe it can. But that also is interesting as we think about what comes with the privacy sandbox and some of these features that Google's going to be adding on in place of third-party cookies.
Yeah, I have a variation of this conversation every couple of weeks with my family about is my phone listening to me? How did I see this ad? It's like, well, I understand why it feels that way, but here's actually how. Hey, you were in the room with your friend who just clicked on this ad, and of course they're talking about it. Just trying to understand, explain the underpinnings of why it feels so magical. Of like, well, now I'm seeing an ad for platypuses, and I never talked about that. Like, now there's actually ways for that to happen. That's not as creepy as the average consumer, like you said, sometimes feels like it is. Yeah.
Although in that instance, I always look at that and go, maybe it is creepier that the algorithm can predict this well versus listening to me.
That's fair.
But in that exact scenario, it is like, well, look, there's location-based signals. That's not that creepy in terms of the delivery of ads, because they still don't know who you are. And then there's just the identity relationship graph. So. Exactly. It is one of those things that folks are inherently distrustful of things they don't understand, and they will often look for the most parsimonious solution to what actually is what they think is happening. What I think is interesting about that, though, is that there have been moves in the advertising space over the years to actually have apps that do listen to you. So there was one called Alfonso a long time ago. 5 years ago. This was actually created for marketers focused on movies and TV. And the core idea behind it was, how can I attribute tune-in data? How can I attribute, I'm advertising for this movie, how will we know if someone goes to see it? And so they would key into certain sound cues in the movie opening or on a TV show, and then they would use that as a deterministic signal to bring that back. But that was pretty much roundly rejected as like, this is pretty invasive and isn't something that we want to do. And then you hear these stories about like Verizon's trying this thing. And so I think there are these edge cases, and those edge cases, quite honestly, create a bigger distraction than, because I don't know anyone who's using that, and I've worked with all kinds of brands, and they're not doing it, which I think is a very, it's a reality check for a lot of folks who are just like, the average marketer is not doing 95% of the stuff.
So circling back for a second to the programmatic conversation a little bit, how about networks like Taboola and Outbrain? Are they going to be significantly impacted by third-party cookies going away?
So yeah, so for those ones specifically, I'm not sure how their actual identity graph is constructed or how their targeting is handled. But what I will say is there's two groups here, right? There's the Google side of this, which is going to be more based on what they're calling topics, but also like the protected audience API for remarketing purposes used to be called Fledge. That's also a confusing thing for marketers, is these things have changed names. And so when you first hear about Turtle Dove, you're like, oh, well, that doesn't exist anymore. Fledge doesn't exist anymore. You know, they change all these names. But there's the Google side of the house where they're venturing further toward that side, and again, also having things like the Google Signal that they'll be able to use. And then there is the, I guess what I call the indie programmatic space. And that is really led by the Trade Desk. And so the Trade Desk they have, at least semantically, divorced themselves from the concept that they were the owners of this. But the idea, or the construct is Unified ID 2.0. And the core idea behind Unified ID 2.0 is the storage of PII associated with a user that is able to persist across different networks. And so they actually have a very broad network scope. LiveRamp is a partner with them. So if you're onboarding PII into LiveRamp, then they're stitching that with all these different signals and identities across different websites where you may be signed in. And that's also why a lot of websites are asking you to sign in. Because when you're in a signed in state, you sort of create this pseudo walled garden where the programmatic inventory can be delivered. I think we'll see how much pressure they get from regulators in coming years as it pertains to the utilization of that, because they'll tell you, well, it's like, we have some kind of pseudo anonymization that is occurring in this, and this is true, but it's also fundamentally predicated on having a deterministic ID. So that is probably where the challenge will arise, is can you use a deterministic ID to go across all these different platforms? And like, if you look at LiveRamp's share price of late, like there's a reality where it's like, yeah, we're still pretty bullish on LiveRamp as a company. And although I do think it's really interesting that they just acquired Habu as a clean room platform, because clean rooms are going to be a really interesting play moving forward as we think about being able to do analysis without deterministic IDs and essentially have everything stored in a safe place. But that is probably also beyond the scope of like 99% of marketers as well. And they'll go, I don't even know what a clean room is. And I don't know if that could or should be the scope of today's conversation, because it's still pretty advanced and still pretty novel for most folks.
Well, let's talk about size of advertisers for a little bit. So I would venture to say, for most, let's say smaller businesses, even small to medium-sized businesses, generally they're going to be using fewer advertising platforms, going to skew heavily towards Google, Meta. Because of that, would you say that changes to third-party cookies are more impactful to those larger advertisers because they're on more of those programmatic channels, or do you think it's equally impactful regardless of advertiser size?
I guess the net of this is there is no impact if you're just running search and Facebook. Like, I guess you could make a case where you start to extrapolate out sort of the network effects of this and say, well, if programmatic media isn't as viable for certain brands who maybe have a lot of their, that's where a lot of their budget is heading, maybe they would then invest more in search and social, and you may see a rise in CPCs and CPMs associated with that. But that's all, relative to the amount of demand in a space, or available inventory, all those components, which I imagine there's still a decent amount of flexibility in there. And quite honestly, brands still don't want to pay too much for acquisition, right? There's still going to have to be that economic trade-off that they account for. So I won't put on my conspiracy theorist hat and go down that avenue, but the net of this is that there will be no impact in terms of their baseline ability to function in that regard. I do think the consideration of remarketing is going to be an interesting one, though, as we think about, again, going cross-site and what the protected audience API is going to be able to offer there. But that's still very early on, and that's I think, frankly, one of the big challenges of this is that because a lot of these elements from Google have been in the proposal stage for so long, and they have changed, we don't quite know how much of them will be deployed and when they'll be deployed. And so there exists right now, but they talk about frames, which is the way that they're going to handle identification on these third-party websites without giving any ID within that site. And they're saying that's not until 2026. So, we're still, even when we hit this point in time, there's still going to be a really long runway for some of these tools or some of these solutions to really come into play for advertisers.
So given that as reality, are there any changes that advertisers should be making right now? Or is it pretty much, wait and see what happens, not much we can do about it?
So it's partially wait and see, but it is also, I think there's just we've talked for years about this idea of signal resilience. And signal resilience is the ability to persist a signal accurately to a platform. So when I'm tracking somebody in browser, for example, if they have an ad blocker, that ad blocker is going to block JavaScript from loading, and therefore will block cookies from loading, and therefore will block any data that can be passed through into Google. But if you're handling that on the server side, then you can have it go through the server side rather than in browser. And what's also really neat about this is that there are a number of vendors out there like Alivar and Blotout, right? Like the premise of those services is that they maintain their own identity graphs on the server side. So there's client side and server side. On the server side, where, for example, with Safari, they have a 7-day retention window on first-party cookies. So if I visit the website today and then I visit 8 days later, they can't stitch those things together in the browser. But you can if you're using the server-side solution with Alivar specifically in that scenario. And that's why they're able to achieve a higher degree of identity resolution. It's because they basically have their own micrograph that works here on the inside until they get to the point where, hey, a real conversion action has happened. It may be 14 days after this click, but now we've been able to stitch this together so we can send that over. So I would recommend that marketers are very mindful of server-side solutions, that they are very mindful of using things like enhanced conversions, and they are when consented, that they are able to send that anonymized or hashed PII through with a conversion action, because that does help for the identity resolution on the platform side. But I think that comes, like, the big piece of this is all consent and having consent frameworks. And so when we think about consent mode that's coming through from Google Ads, going to be enforcing that on everyone. That's Google passing the buck a little bit, right? That's basically saying, like, hey, any data that you send to us, you're certifying this is good and that you've got consent, so it's not our problem if it's mishandled. Which, look, it is everyone's responsibility. I think that we as corporate citizens need to be very mindful of what we're doing and the negative impacts that it can have, but we also need to be very mindful of don't just wait for the legislation to come into play. Do be proactive. Do give consumers that option to opt out, even if it's not 100% legally necessary. It is something that we have to be very mindful of moving forward, because inevitably what happens as you go through these types of moments, and we talk about the loss of third-party cookies, is, well, maybe the evil side of ad tech starts to pop up a little bit more, and we start to see all kinds of different ways that folks would try and persist identity and have all these elements. And so that is a little bit of a challenge that I see in just in terms of how the industry always evolves, is you get rid of something and then it's replaced with something worse. And I think we have to be very mindful of that as marketers, that we are not chasing those sort of short-term dreams, because the long-term play here should be maintaining consumer trust. That is what is the most essential ingredient to the advertiser, the world of advertising, is, do consumers trust you or do they inherently dislike you? And for what it's worth, Apple has done a wonderful job of telling everyone to hate us. And they go out there and they, you see the iPhone commercials and they're like, my credit card number is 123. I'm like, no one is tracking credit card numbers unless your name is MasterCard or Visa. They're the only companies, right? Like it's inherently misrepresenting what is happening. And what they're talking about is security, which is incredibly important. We should all support security. Privacy is a different component of this, and there are all kinds of potential impacts that the consumer may feel as part of that as well.
We could talk about that for a very long time.
Yeah.
And the reality that, hey, the internet is free. We don't pay a subscription to go on and so forth. But very controversial topic for certain. Question for you about server side. You brought server side up. Many of our clients use Google Tag Manager, sometimes client side, sometimes server side, to deploy various codes in their websites. When Google Tag Manager is installed server side from your experience, is that a good solution? Does that generally work well, or do you have any concerns about using GTM in particular, server side, to accomplish that?
No, it is a very viable means. I think the granularity of control that is afforded to advertisers by utilizing a server-side solution it gives you a lot more control over what you are sending to platforms. And I've always subscribed to this idea of minimum viable data, right? Like, why we have to have a reason why we're sending certain attributes and elements. And when you're loading tags in a client-side capacity, you just send them everything in the kitchen sink. And if you look at like the page view tag for Facebook, it just clicks everything everywhere all the time. Well, I want to have some more control over that. So when the payload is generated and being able to be pushed through server side, I can take away elements of that payload that I don't think that this platform would need, or that I may not want to send through because I don't need to stitch an email with a page view, things like that. Again, this comes down to the sensitivity of a business. It comes down to the degree to which you have garnered consumer consent. But all of those elements are controllable when you are using the server-side Google Tag Manager approach. So I'm a big fan of provisioning that, and I would just highly recommend it to clients out there. Telium is another good option. If you're obviously in the Adobe world, I think they have the Alloy SDK. If you're really sensitive about privacy and privacy tracking, I think it's good to maybe check out Piwik Pro. They do have they don't like the phrase Google Analytics alternative, but that is the easiest way to tell folks out there what it is. So it's a Google Analytics alternative that will allow for some degree of privacy-centric tracking to maintain without, say, tracking a user's IP address, which under CPRA, or under CCPA and CPRA here in California, is considered to be a personal identifier.
So speaking of specific programs, channels, you mentioned some names there, and we'll link to those in the description for the video as well, so people can check out. Are there any other tools, let's say just in the general attribution space, data visualization, anywhere that you're like, hey, I love this tool, this program,
Sure.
I spent a lot of time here, that people should check out?
On the data viz side, I think 99% of marketers can get away utilizing Looker Studio, and if you want to get a little bit more advanced, utilizing BigQuery to ensure that you're getting high quality raw data streams coming through there. But there's always a lift required with those things. The one thing I want to key in here on is this idea of attribution, because I'm what I would describe as a recovering MTA-aholic. And what that means is I went out on the conference circuit for years. I was speaking at SMX Advanced and these other places, all about this ideal dream of deterministic multi-touch data-driven attribution. And the reality is it was always slightly wrong. There was never any way that you were always going to get 100% of these touch points through. But we as marketers have this love affair or affinity, I think it's because of Google Analytics, with this idea that I can track a click to a conversion and it's one-to-one and this is the whole picture. There's nothing else to be discussed. End of the story. Please invest more in paid search. That idea, I think is one that we've spent years selling folks on, but it leads to incorrect conclusions. And when you think about data loss happening in our ecosystem, it becomes even more profound. So I think about this a little bit like this, it's like erosion. So over time, the cliffside is going away, grains of sand are slipping off. But if you live on that cliffside, you don't really notice it until suddenly the cliffside is at your front door. And that is not too dissimilar from how we should be thinking about deterministic attribution, in that the data loss is being made up by modeled data. And so you have to start asking, how comfortable am I utilizing modeled data? And we should be comfortable using modeled data, but we should also think of verification mechanisms. So I really like to think about incrementality testing. I think the platforms have been making this a lot more accessible to advertisers. You can run a conversion lift study, you can run a brand lift study, right? All those are actually now very accessible. You don't necessarily need analysts to go out there and configure like how I'm going to do a geo-based match market. There's still value in that for more advanced advertisers. But I would start with that, and then I would really want to start leaning into things like high velocity media mix modeling. And for those who aren't familiar, this is what's old is new again. Media mix modeling has been around for a really long time. The historic constraint was how much data you need to get a viable signal or to get to have model accuracy. There have been a lot of advancements here in recent years. Facebook has come out with Robin. Facebook Robin is an open source, freely available media mix modeling platform. There's very affordable, I think a few $1,000s a month platforms like Cassandra. If you want to get more expensive or just better accuracy, there are platforms like Recast out there. And I put all of this out there because as we think about this sort of fetishization of attribution, we're thinking about very much in the terms of like how well did I do, when really we should be thinking about it through the lens of how can I perform better in the future? Where should my next best dollar go? When am I going to hit the point of diminishing returns? And those are the important signals that you can get from a high velocity media mix model. So I wouldn't go out there and say abandon all these aspects of attribution. I think there's a blended approach, but you have to verify and validate against incrementality. And you also need to think about modeling for your investment, because hey, we are going to invest a lot in Facebook right now. And you're like, okay, is it still going to function as it has been? There's no way. Everything is always volatile. There's always changes. There's always improvements, right? I think even Facebook's probably one of the best examples of this, knowing that after ATT, we all saw the effects of that and the quality of returns, they all depressed. But over time, Facebook's model got better and better, and they were able to utilize some of these signals. And now we're at a point where I think we're on parity with pre-ATT in terms of the quality of targeting that exists within Facebook, without having to use those the maids or any of those specific identifiers within their app experience. So this is to say there are models that can get better and better and better, and that's going to be the future of measurement in our industry, not deterministic. So the longer you rely on deterministic, the more that's going to erode, and your intelligence will diminish, but you won't realize it until it's too late. So I always advocate folks take this jump, make the step toward modeling and incrementality.
So if I'm watching this and let's say I'm a business owner, I said, okay, this sounds really cool.
Yep.
What should I, literally where should I go to figure this out? What should my next step be? Is there a particular website that you go to and sign up for a program? Should they reach out to you and have a conversation with you? What should they do?
They're always welcome to reach out to me. I love having these types of conversations and guiding folks in the right direction. With that said, it is inherently complicated, and there are aspects to this that you'll spend years trying to learn and figure out why this is. What I would really start with is asking the question of, how confident am I in my investment? How confident am I in my marketing at this moment in time? And if the answer is not very, or honestly, if it's anything but absolutely confident, then I would start to think about what would give me confidence here. And for some folks, the confidence signal might just be incrementality testing, in which case you don't need to go to someone like me or you, right? You can just, whoever manages your advertising, they can be running these incrementality tests and platform, and you're utilizing that as a signal of validation, because hey, your media mix is pretty simple. It's just Google Ads and Facebook. I don't need to know about all these complex changes and media mix modeling really comes into play when you are more diversified in terms of programmatic media and so forth. If you are at that point in time, though, that's exactly when you want to consider working with a high velocity media mix modeling vendor, or hiring a data scientist that can build this out internally for you. I recommend going with a vendor if this is a first time for brands, largely because there are two components to this. One is the modeling, but the bigger, hairier, scarier component is the fact that you've got to get all the data in there, and it's got to be clean, it's got to be classified, you have to have the taxonomy figured out. Those things take forever. Every single time I've been involved with a data project where taxonomy comes up or classification, any of these things, it is someone sitting with a spreadsheet with thousands of lines of campaigns going, why is this categorized this way? Because it's not just, is it paid search or not, right? It's like, what tactic is this specifically within this funnel? And all of that needs to be figured out. And that's why I think going with more of a white glove approach, having a vendor that provides this is a great way to do it. I've seen some good moves from Northbeam and from, gosh, I can't remember the name of it. They'll kill me. It was I know a number of folks over there. It's the other one though. But they are also making a move away from this sort of modeled hybrid attribution toward more of the media mix modeling approach, because they need to have these additional validation signals. So the end sum of it is you want to try and diversify the scope of measurement tools that you're using, but more than anything, you want to figure out why you're not confident in your media investment. But if you are confident, then keep going, right? Keep spending, and as long as that is a profitable return for you and it's hitting your goals, you're good. You don't need to overcomplicate this.
I think an incredibly simplified example of kind of what you're talking about there is a conversation I had with a client last week where we're running a bunch of different just search campaigns for them. And they're like, hey, we've got the same keyword. How come this keyword like the CPA is $100 here and it's $50 here. Like, why isn't it performing the same across? It's the same keyword, and you have to have the explanation. Well, okay, like you said, extrapolated times a million
Yep.
for the complexity of the marketing mix modeling. But well, there's different geography targeted here.
Exactly.
There's different target CPA. There's different signals, fill in the blank. And
Exactly.
sometimes it's hard for people who are just trying to run a business and don't want to spend their life learning these things to be like, well, it's the same word. It should perform the same way. So, yeah.
I mean, the simplest way to go about it is take a look at how much you're investing in marketing. Take a look what the total sum of what marketing drives you. Is that equation something that you're happy with? If it is, then carry on. There may be some inefficiency in there, sure, but it's the Wanaka problem of the 50% works, etc. That whole construct, it starts to fail. Like, things start to fail if you're not happy with what your overarching output is, and that's the point at which you really need to go back and figure out, okay, let's test into these new networks, or let's test what happens when we don't go with remarketing for a while, and does it have a net output? The one caveat I'd put out there is oftentimes folks will make a change, and we all know this, but it's called ad stock, right? Ad stock is that's the technical name in the media mix model. Ad stock is just the time horizon for an effect of an ad. So if I have a video ad that I put out there, I would expect that has a longer time effect or a longer time horizon than a brand search ad at the very bottom of the funnel. I would expect anyone who clicks on that, if you don't convert within a day, you're probably never going to convert. The video, though, I don't expect that to convert anyone tomorrow even. I expect it to play out. It's the whole reason why you advertise the Super Bowl and Coke sales don't go ballistic the next day. It's over a longer horizon. That is something that a lot of folks have a problem with when they do these holdout tests and they go, it's not showing significance. I'm like, you actually have to give it longer. And that is that's a sort of a hard truth to swallow, that you've got to be comfortable with the fact that there may be some lost yield out there for a longer period than you would initially have planned.
Yeah, no, that's a really important point. It's not enough to just make the changes. Then you have to analyze, like you said, see what happens and make sure you give the right time horizon. Because sometimes there's also that temptation, especially fast-moving CEOs, marketing managers, of oh, I don't like this. Let's make this change. But it's like, all right, cool. But we need to then come back to this at the appropriate time and say, was this good or bad, and then continue to improve incrementally.
Absolutely.
From there.
I mean, that's why I also think that all marketers, if they're looking to level up their career in any capacity, take a statistics course. It'll be the number one thing you can possibly do. If you understand what a power calculation is, if you understand, like, everyone will talk about significance, but the problem with significance is you may have seen, everyone runs A/B tests and they go, well, it was significant and now it's not. And I'm like, yeah, because your power calculation is going to dictate when the significance is acceptable. And so that becomes a component of this. It's the same thing that I think that everyone on any C team anywhere has to take an economics or accounting class, because you have to understand basic financial mathematics to understand how you can do this within your specific domain.
Well, Simon, thank you so much for your time today. I'm going to kind of wrap things up here with maybe a little bit of a less geeky question, because I have really been enjoying digging into the specifics here. But taking a step back, putting your philosophical hat on, do you think that, where we're kind of going, deprecation of third-party cookies, etc., do you think that that's making the internet a better or a worse place for the average consumer?
And while it is less geeky, it is inherently complex. Cookies were invented in 1994. I can't think of anything else in my life that I use that was also from 1994. The amount of internet time, the time since that moment has changed so drastically that the original intention of how cookies were designed to aid in the web experience, I think, has really shifted. The question of, is this going to make things better or worse for the average consumer? If you ask them on the street and you say, do you want to be tracked online across websites? They will tell you no, resoundingly. They'll say, I don't want that. I don't even want personalization, any of those things. So there's a positive aspect to the consumer sentiment of them when they're on the internet. But I think there's also a case to be made for the potential negatives associated with this, which would include, say, diminished publisher revenues associated with advertising on site. So when the CPM decreases and I'm not making as much per page view on an article, my options are really limited to increasing the number of ads or putting a paywall in front of you. And in that scenario, I don't think it becomes a better internet for users out there. I think you can go back and forth on, some people want personalization, some people don't. but I know that people don't want more ads. I think that's a universal. I don't want more ads as an advertiser, because I look at this and go, the more ads that there are, the harder it is for me to break through that noise of just this. It becomes like idiocracy when you have 50 ads on the TV at one time. You're like, I don't know where to look. I'm just not going to look at any of them. I avoid everything. So I think that is a very real component to this. And quite honestly, in recent years, the internet has been suffering because of how this has been playing out. And now we're sort of on the precipice of the AI generated content revolution. So all of this is leading us to a point where media needs a way to survive. And if it can't rely on increasing ad revenues, it's going to have to increase the number of ads, or it's going to have to paywall. I don't think that makes a better internet for everyone if I have to pay to access BBC News, right? Like, that's really important for me, I think, in terms of society, being able to stay abreast of what's happening and what's going on out there in the world without it being paywalled. I'm happy to pay for it, but I know the average consumer, especially, those who are not as well off, they deserve a free and open internet, and it's one that I think we have to really focus on protecting.
Well, Simon, thank you again so much for your time today. Where should people go to learn more about you or interact with you if they'd like to online?
Sure, yeah. So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so you can definitely connect with me on there, Simon Poulton. I'm also decently active on Twitter, or X. So S Poulton is my handle there. And then, of course, John, as you mentioned at the top, I'm the co-host of a podcast called Measure Up, where my co-host and I, Jim Gianolio, we host a lot of guests from within the measurement space and talk about somewhat complex measurement topics. But I also lean into this as sort of a cosplay data guy. Like, I always came from this world of marketing strategy, and like, I do love data, but as I really think about it, I come from more of the lens that I think most people will be listening to that. So, if you want to just level up on measurement topics and what's impacting the world of measurement, it's a good one just to listen to. You might glean something through osmosis, or there might be a topic that comes up. You go, I want to learn more about clean rooms, and that becomes something that you want to follow up on. So, Measure Up. We're on Spotify, Apple, all places good podcasts are sold, or not sold. It's free. Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah, and the paywall for that is.
Exactly. Yeah, we've got 25 ads in the pre-roll. It's great.
Awesome. Simon, thanks so much. For those watching, thank you for spending some time with us. Hope this was helpful. And again, we'll have all those links in the show notes. Until next time, take care.